Imagine sitting in a commercial airplane cockpit, The plane itself is this absolute marvel of physics.
Oh, totally. The engineering is just incredible.
Right. The wings are perfectly aerodynamic, the engines are flawless, the fuel mixtures are calibrated down to the microdrop. But then, say, during a severe storm, the plane crashes anyway.
Yeah, which is a terrifying scenario.
It really is. And you have to ask why. Well, it's because the engineers who built that magnificent machine, they forgot to account for the most complex, unpredictable piece of hardware on board, the human brain in the pilot seat.
That is such a massive blind spot we have. I mean, we tend to separate the hard sciences like physics and engineering from the study of human behavior.
Right, like they're totally unrelated.
Exactly. We treat them like completely different worlds, but they're so deeply entangled.
Which is exactly why today we're taking a deep dive into our source material to look at this, like, invisible engine running underneath our daily lives.
Yes, and it's a fascinating one.
It really is. You might think scientific thinking is just for academics in ivory towers, but it's actually quietly shaping everything, from the design of airplane dashboards to our lifespans and even our justice system.
It really touches everything.
So true. We are unpacking an instructor's manual on a chapter called Why Science from the psychology textbook Discovering Psychology 2.0. And a quick note of credit to the author, Edward Diener, and the Diener Education Fund for providing these materials.
We have a pretty remarkable journey ahead of us today.
Oh, for sure.
We're going to trace how this specific way of thinking pulled humanity out of the grim superstitions of the 1920s all the way up to how we're navigating these incredibly complex biometric privacy laws right now in 2026.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand the power of this psychological engine, we have to look at the dark room humanity was sitting in before we, finally found the light switch.
That's a great way to put it.
And it was literally a matter of life and death.
Yeah, the textbook gives us this really striking historical anchor. It asks us to step back exactly 1 century to July of 1926.
Okay, so 100 years ago.
Right. In that era, the global life expectancy hovered around 30 years.
Wow, 30 years old. That's just wild.
I mean, a simple bacterial infection like strep throat or just a cut on your hand, that was frequently a death sentence.
And today you wouldn't even miss a day of work for that.
Exactly. But back then, there were no antibiotics. There was basically no understanding of microbial behavior at all.
So people were just trying to cure deadly infections with, what, folklore?
Basically, yeah. They were applying mud poultices or just relying on whatever local superstition was popular at the time.
Because they were completely at the mercy of the elements. They just didn't understand the mechanisms of the physical world.
They completely lacked a reliable method for testing reality. But, within a single century, humanity extended that life expectancy to well over 80 years.
That is a massive leap.
It is. We conquered what the text describes as dark, unpredictable natural forces. And we didn't do it through, better guessing.
Right, it wasn't just luck.
No, we did it through rigorous experimentation. We shifted from magical thinking to concrete measurement.
And the material illustrates that shift with a really vivid example from a mid-2026 elementary school classroom.
Oh, the baking soda experiment.
Yes. You have these young kids, maybe first graders, and they're mixing ordinary vinegar and baking soda to create that classic bubbling volcano reaction.
Right, we've all seen it.
Yeah, and we look at that and think, oh, what a cute science fair project. But what's actually happening in that first grader's brain is profound.
It really is. It's the exact moment a human being learns that the universe is legible.
Legible. I like that word.
Yeah, when those kids watch that chemical reaction, they aren't seeing magic. They're learning that reality operates under predictable, repeatable laws.
Like if I combine X and Y, Z happens.
Every single time.
It fundamentally changes how you interact with the world. Suddenly, the universe isn't this chaotic place governed by angry spirits or random chance. It's a system that can be understood.
Exactly.
And the sources point out 2 specific tools that make this understanding possible: systematic observation and empirical methods. Let's make sure we really understand those terms because they sound a bit heavy.
Sure. So systematic observation just means you aren't casually watching things happen. You're actively keeping score.
Like intentionally tracking the natural world to gather reliable data.
Precisely. And then empirical methods mean you're relying on hard physical measurements, like a thermometer, a scale, a timer, a chemical region.
Rather than just trusting your gut or speculating.
Right. You're forcing the universe to leave a physical footprint that you can actually measure.
Which brings up a really powerful quote from the material by Carl Sagan. He said, "Science is a way of thinking much more than it is a body of knowledge."
This is a great quote.
So if we take Sagan at his word, does that mean the first grader mixing baking soda is, technically, executing the exact same process as a top-tier researcher in a multi-million-dollar lab?
Well, the scale of the equipment is vastly different, obviously.
Yeah.
But the cognitive mechanism is identical. Both the child and the researcher are confronting a mystery, formulating a question, manipulating a physical variable, and observing the outcome without bias.
They're both refusing to accept "because I said so" or "because it's magic" as an answer.
Exactly.
And that is incredibly empowering for you as a listener. It means this isn't some exclusive club. It's a cognitive toolkit anyone can use.
It really is.
But there is a catch here. Just having a way of thinking isn't enough to prevent us from fooling ourselves, because the human brain is essentially a hypersensitive pattern matching machine.
Oh, absolutely. We see faces in the clouds, we see conspiracies and random events,
Our brains are desperate to find meaning.
which means we are incredibly susceptible to confirmation bias. We'll observe the world systematically, sure, but we'll only count the data points that prove what we already want to believe.
Right. And that risk of self-deception is exactly why this way of thinking has to be highly structured into hypotheses and theories.
That's the safeguard.
So let's break that down. A hypothesis forces you to state your assumptions out loud before you run the test, right?
That is the crucial function of a hypothesis. It's a testable proposition. You isolate specific variables in controlled conditions, and you predict the outcome.
You draw a line in the sand.
Exactly. If the experiment crosses that line, you're right. If it doesn't, you must admit you're wrong. You cannot move the goalposts after the fact.
No rewriting history.
Right. And as those verified observations accumulate over time, researchers build series, which are these comprehensive frameworks that explain complex phenomena.
Okay, I want to push back on a huge stereotype here. When we hear about theories and hypotheses, we always picture the lone genius in a white coat.
Oh, the Einstein trope.
Yeah, locked in a basement lab having this massive eureka moment all by themselves. But the sources highlight that this entire process is deeply democratic.
The lone genius is a myth.
Totally.
Unlike subjective personal opinions, scientific conclusions absolutely must remain open to public evaluation. If someone claims they've discovered a new way to synthesize a chemical or a new way to treat anxiety, they have to publish their exact recipe.
It's just like an open source software project.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
Yeah, the code only gets bulletproof because 1,000 different programmers are actively trying to break it. If there's a bug in your psychological theory, someone else is going to find it.
And finding those bugs is what we call independent replication. It's the lifeblood of the system.
So how does that work in practice?
Well, if a researcher claims a certain study technique improves memory by 20%, the community doesn't just applaud and move on.
They test it.
Right. They take the exact same variables, run the exact same test in a dozen different labs, and see if they get that same 20%. If they don't, the original theory is discarded or revised.
And we're actually seeing this democratic framework become more accessible than ever, which ties into some fascinating current events from the spring of 2026 mentioned in the text.
Yes, the AI integration.
In March, prominent universities launched advanced neural network tools to customize introductory psychology curriculums.
These AI platforms were a massive breakthrough for educational equity.
They really were.
I mean, imagine a non-traditional student, perhaps a single parent, working night shifts, taking a psych course.
Usually a huge struggle to keep up.
Right. But the neural network automatically adjusts the reading levels, the pacing, and the real-world examples based on that specific learner's background and schedule.
It just eliminates those traditional barriers.
Entirely.
But the open source analogy really comes to life in April of 2026 because those same first-year collegiate students didn't just read about psychological theories.
No, they actually did the science.
Yeah, they participated in a massive collaborative study to evaluate the replication rates of classic behavioral science experiments. If independent replication is so crucial, why did it take until 2026 to let first-year students actively test these theories in the classroom?
Well, the logistics were just too complex before, but they used their customized platforms to act as remote laboratories.
That's so cool.
They were reproducing classic studies on memory and cognitive bias live, generating fresh data to see if the old 20th century theories still held up across a diverse, modern demographic.
And the non-traditional learners explicitly noted that participating in these live replications completely demystified the underlying mechanics of
It
discovery.
wasn't a dusty textbook anymore.
No, they were actively stress testing the code of human behavior. So what does this all mean? We've established how this democratic method finds the truth. Let's look at what we actually do with that truth.
Well, psychological science measurably improves global welfare by optimizing human performance in high-stakes environments.
Okay, so we can go back to the airplane cockpit example we discussed earlier. I was fascinated by this because I think of behavioral psychology as discovering the source code of an app that keeps crashing.
I like that.
You finally look at the data and realize a hidden background process like cognitive overload is draining the battery. How did psychologists actually fix the cockpits?
So early airplane dashboards were an ergonomic nightmare.
Just dials everywhere.
Dozens of identical black dials scattered randomly, all providing crucial information. During an emergency, a pilot's stress response skyrockets, which causes their peripheral vision to tunnel and their working memory to plummet.
They literally could not process the warning lights.
Exactly. So behaviorists studied human cognitive load. They mapped human eye movement during panic states.
They figured out how the brain actually searches for information when it's terrified.
Precisely. And they used that empirical data to redesign the cockpits. They grouped critical gauges together, changed the colors of dials to leverage natural visual contrast, and created shapes that could be identified purely by touch.
So they reduced the cognitive friction.
Yes, which drastically reduced pilot errors and saved countless lives.
They designed the machine to work with the human operating system instead of against it.
That's exactly it.
And that same understanding of our mental operating system revolutionized the justice system, too. The text talks about how cognitive bias studies transformed the way we handle eyewitness memory in courtrooms.
This is a huge one.
Mm.
For centuries, the justice system treated human memory like a video camera.
Like you see a crime, you hit record, and on the witness stand, you just hit play.
Right. But psychological studies systematically demonstrated that memory is highly reconstructive. It's fragile.
Very fragile.
Every time you recall an event, your brain essentially rewrites the file, and it is heavily influenced by external suggestions.
So if a police officer asks a leading question during an interrogation, they can accidentally rewrite the witness's memory of the suspect's face.
And the empirical data proved that was happening constantly. It exposed the massive flaws in traditional police lineups.
Where witnesses would just pick the person who looked most like the perpetrator compared to the others.
Right, a relative judgment, rather than making an absolute identification. By exposing these cognitive biases, psychologists forced global changes to interrogation protocols.
Like implementing those double-blind lineups where the officer administering the test doesn't even know who the suspect is.
Exactly, so they can't unintentionally drop hints.
That behavioral data is literally protecting innocent people from going to prison. And this scientific approach is just as powerful in clinical settings. The sources focus heavily on evidence-based cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Yes, because millions of people suffer from debilitating anxiety and depression. Instead of relying on vague therapeutic concepts, researchers applied systematic observation to figure out the exact relationship between thought, emotion, and action.
CBT teaches patients how to identify a spiraling, irrational thought, physically interrupt that neural loop, and reframe it before it triggers a behavioral panic response.
And we're seeing that applied in real time. In early 2026, community colleges started using these evidence-based CBT strategies to help non-traditional undergraduates deal with rising anxiety rates.
Which is so needed right now.
Definitely. These adult learners reported immediate emotional relief just by using these scientifically validated mindfulness exercises, which directly boosted their retention in school.
It demonstrates that psychology provides tangible tools for human flourishing. There's a quote from Albert Bandura in our text where he says, "Psychology cannot tell people how they ought to live their lives. It can, however, provide them with the means for effecting change."
It gives you the operational leverage to fix the crashing app.
Yes. And there's another quote from Abraham Maslow that ties right into this. He says, "If you intentionally plan on being less than you are capable of being, then I warn you that you'll be unhappy for the rest of your life."
Science is giving us the means to reach that full capability. It's a deeply optimistic view of our trajectory as a species.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting, because I'm going to push back on that optimism for a second.
Okay.
We just spent this time praising science for saving lives, fixing airplanes, and curing anxiety. But the textbook explicitly points out that every magnificent leap forward carries unforeseen consequences.
That is true.
So aren't we just on a treadmill here? We invent technology to cure our physical ailments, but it creates psychological alienation, which we then need more science to fix. We're just running in place.
I wouldn't call it a treadmill. I'd call it an ascending spiral.
An ascending spiral. How so?
We are definitely facing new, complex problems.
Yeah.
But trading cholera and a 30-year life expectancy for modern screen time isolation is still a massive net positive for human survival.
Okay, fair enough. The problems are a luxury of survival.
Exactly.
But the emotional toll is real. The text uses the profound paradox of our absolute digital connection during the winter of 2026.
Right, the smartphone paradox.
A smartphone can effortlessly unite distant families across the globe with high-definition video, yet it severely isolates individuals sitting in the exact same living room, staring silently at separate feeds.
And we see the same pattern at the macro level. Rapid industrialization triumphantly eradicated deadly plagues by allowing mass production of medicines and sanitation systems.
But at the same time,
It simultaneously unleashed severe environmental degradation across the planet.
every technological solution introduces a new systemic challenge. And we saw this play out in education recently with the June 2026 report on ubiquitous online testing platforms.
These digital systems offered unprecedented scheduling flexibility.
Right. For working parents trying to earn a degree, being able to take an exam at 2:00 a.m. on a Tuesday was a massive logistical benefit.
But the data showed a severe secondary effect. It exacerbated deep feelings of isolation among the younger campus residents.
Because they lost the shared human struggle. They lost the informal hallway chats before a big test or commiserating at the library afterward.
The technology solved a logistical problem, but created a psychological vacuum.
Forcing academic advisors to rapidly develop hybrid support groups just to counter the side effects of the software.
It perfectly illustrates a quote from B.F. Skinner in the reading. He said, "The real problem is not whether machines think, but whether men do."
Oh, that's heavy.
We are building these incredible frictionless systems, but we have to remain actively thoughtful about the human cost of removing that friction.
And we've just seen how tracking student data and moving life online can cause intense feelings of isolation. When technology has the power to look so deeply into our habits and behaviors, the question immediately stops being, can we build this? And becomes, who protects the person being watched?
Which brings us to the ethical guardrails of scientific progress.
Right, because the necessity of strict ethical boundaries cannot be overstated.
The text acknowledges that the history of scientific inquiry is not without its dark chapters,
Very dark.
where unsuspecting human subjects were subjected to emotional or physical distress because the researchers prioritized the data over human dignity.
Ethical guidelines are fascinating to me. A lot of people view them as red tape, a speed bump meant to slow science down.
That's a common misconception.
Right. I see ethics as the brakes on a race car. The brakes are the only reason you can safely push a car to 200 miles an hour. If you don't have a reliable way to stop, you can't push the limits of discovery without killing someone.
That's an excellent analogy.
Yeah.
The brakes provide a mandatory structured template for safety. Modern institutional review boards, or IRBs, established uncompromising frameworks.
What are the foundational principles they look for?
Researchers must adhere to a few things. They have to obtain explicit informed consent, maintain strict confidentiality, and minimize any potential risks.
What if they have to lie to the participant, like for the study to work?
Good question. If a psychological study scientifically requires brief deception like not telling a participant the true nature of a memory test so they act naturally, researchers are mandated to thoroughly debrief the participants immediately afterward.
So by the summer of 2026, entering a research laboratory feels entirely safe because participants retain total autonomy.
Yes, but the laboratory isn't just a physical room anymore.
Right, the technology is moving so fast that our daily environments are the laboratory. The sources bring up the 2026 legislative mandates governing educational apps.
These apps are designed to optimize learning by collecting biometric emotional responses from remote learners.
Tracking things like microexpressions.
Microexpressions, pupil dilation, or typing speeds to measure if a student is experiencing severe frustration during a math problem, so the AI can adjust the difficulty in real time.
Which sounds helpful, but also kind of invasive.
Exactly. The consumer protection laws passed recently ensure that adult students returning to higher education can use these digital tools without compromising their personal information.
Their private psychological metrics remain fully secure under these modern standards. But I want to pose this question directly to you, listening to this deep dive right now.
I'm curious what you're going to ask.
If an online app tracked your biometric moods, your actual involuntary physiological responses, to help you study, would you really trust it with your private thoughts, even with these 2026 laws in place?
It is the defining skepticism of our era. The legislation establishes a moral contract, but trusting a digital entity with your internal emotional state is a profound leap of faith.
It really is.
We're inviting systematic observation into our own nervous systems. It requires us to constantly educate ourselves on how these algorithms operate.
As Carl Rogers is quoted in the material, the only person who is educated is the one who has learned how to learn and change.
We can't just passively consume the technology.
No, we have to continually learn how to navigate the world we are building.
To synthesize the journey we've taken today, we started by observing children mixing baking soda to discover that the physical universe follows predictable laws. We saw how applying that same empirical observation to human behavior allowed us to redesign airplane cockpits, rewrite courtroom procedures, and relieve clinical anxiety.
And ultimately, we arrived at an era where we have to pass complex legislation to protect our biometric brainwaves from the very technology we invented to educate us. Understanding the scientific method isn't just for passing a university exam. It's the invisible tool that helps you cut through the absolute noise of daily life.
Absolutely.
It helps you recognize your own unsubstantiated biases, and it empowers you to demand empirical evidence in a world that is constantly trying to sell you on magical thinking.
And as we navigate this rapidly evolving landscape, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Go for it.
We discussed B.F. Skinner's warning about whether men will continue to think as machines advance.
Right.
When we consider those 2026 biometric laws, we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question about the future of discovery. As our devices become smart enough to track our physiological metrics, analyze our habits, and predict our emotional moods before we even consciously feel them, who's actually conducting the systematic observation anymore?
Oh, wow.
Are we still the scientists exploring the world, or are we slowly becoming the subjects of our own technology?